Lurking in the shadows, identity hidden, the world's most notorious serial killer stalked London's streets for 3 months in the late 1800s, brutally killing at least 5 women, and as many as 11. The slayings caused hysteria in England and around the world. Dubbed by the public as Jack the Ripper, due to the extraordinarily violent nature of the murders, the killer is yet to be identified, after more than a century. To understand why these murders caused such a media frenzy in England back in 1888, we need to understand London's socio-economic situation. Back in the 19th century, Britain saw an influx of refugees from Ireland, Tsarist Russia and other places where people's lives were affected by poverty, famine or war. The parish of Whitechapel in London's East End became increasingly overcrowded, with the population increasing to approximately 80,000 inhabitants by 1888. Joseph Conrad's 1899 novel, Heart of Darkness, describes London as one of the dark places of the earth. To the theatergoers and shoppers thronging the well-lit, opulent streets of the West End, this description might have seemed out of place, but just 3 miles to the east, in the neighborhood of Whitechapel, disease, alcoholism, and poverty ravaged the lives of thousands of souls. The endemic poverty drove many women to prostitution to survive on a daily basis. The economic problems in Whitechapel were accompanied by a steady rise in social tensions. Public perceptions of Whitechapel was that it was a notorious den of immorality. Such perceptions were strengthened in the autumn of 1888, when the series of vicious and grotesque murders attributed to Jack the Ripper received unprecedented coverage in the media. And though it was not uncommon for women in these parts to end up as victims of assault, it was extremely unusual for them to be found so terribly mutilated. When Jack the Ripper was terrorizing Whitechapel, other killers were at work as well. Collectively known as the Whitechapel murders, the violent deaths of 11 women revealed the dangers facing lower-class women at the time. Of these murders, most experts agree that Jack the Ripper was responsible for the 5 that occurred from August through November 1888. Discovered in the early morning hours of August 31st, Mary Ann Nichols, also known as Polly, was a 43-year-old mother of 5 and the first confirmed victim of Jack the Ripper. Abandoned by her husband, she earned a living through workhouses, prostitution, and petty theft. Like many women of her class, her name might have been lost to time, had she not been murdered that August night. 1 week later, Annie Chapman, a 47-year-old widow and mother, was discovered on September 8, shortly before 6 a.m. in a yard on Hanbury Street. Her injuries appeared similar to Nichols's, but she was missing some of her internal organs. At the end of the month, the killer would claim 2 more lives in one night: Elizabeth Stride, age 45, and Catherine Eddowes, age 46. The last official victim met her death on November 9, 1888. The body of 25-year-old Mary Jane Kelly was discovered brutally mutilated in a lodging house in Miller's Court. All residents of Whitechapel, these women lived in poverty, which left them vulnerable to the predator prowling the streets. A large team of policemen conducted house-to-house inquiries throughout Whitechapel. Forensic material was collected and examined. Suspects were identified, traced, and either examined more closely or eliminated from the inquiry. More than 2,000 people were interviewed, upwards of 300 people were investigated, and 80 people were detained. Despite countless investigations claiming definitive evidence of the brutal killer's identity, his or her name and motive are still unknown. A number of letters were allegedly sent by the killer to the London Metropolitan Police Service, known as Scotland Yard, taunting officers about his gruesome activities and speculating on murders to come. The moniker Jack the Ripper originates from a letter, which may have been a hoax, published at the time of the attacks. Following the discovery of the body of Mary Jane Kelly in November, physician Thomas Bond was invited to perform an autopsy on her remains. In the course of his grim task, Bond noted similarities with the 4 previous deaths. The murderer slashed the victim's throat from one side to the other and then cut open the abdominal cavity. A theory mauled by the police was that the Ripper was a physician or even a surgeon, but Bond, who knew a thing or two about incisions, dismissed this. True to his nickname, the murderer was no precise cutter, and lacked even the technical knowledge of a butcher or horse slaughterer. Whitechapel's closeness to the London docks led the police to think the killer might have been a sailor passing through or perhaps a stevedore. At the time of the murders, the police investigation centered on local characters. Among these were Aaron Kosminski and John Jack Pizer, both working-class men. Francis Tumblety was an American-born quack doctor who possessed a collection of human organs, and it was reported, detested prostitutes. Montague John Druitt, who was from a wealthy background but had fallen on hard times, was regarded as sexually deviant. Surin Klasovsky was a known poisoner, but not a stabber and mutilator. The fact that Whitechapel was home to many Jews, and that two of the early suspects, Pizer and Kosminski, were Jews, fueled anti-Semitic feelings at the time. Pizer was suspected of being an unidentified and malevolent prowler, nicknamed Leather Apron by the press. The media characterized this figure as Jewish, with one article noting that local women are united in the belief that he is a Jew or of Jewish parentage. The cases against the early suspects fell apart, either because of a lack of evidence or because suspects had solid alibis. The police force came under increasing attack in the press, eventually leading to the resignation of the Scotland Yard chief, Sir Charles Warren. The new lead investigator, Melville Macnaghten, was popular with the public, but even he could not solve the crime. Various theories about Jack the Ripper's identity have been produced over the past several decades, which include claims accusing the famous Victorian painter Walter Sickert, a Polish migrant, and even the grandson of Queen Victoria. Butchers, slaughterers, surgeons, and physicians were suspected because of the manner of the mutilations, but the police ruled them out as suspects. Since 1888, more than 100 suspects have been named, contributing to widespread folklore and ghoulish entertainment surrounding the mystery. Jack the Ripper's murders suddenly stopped in the fall of 1888, but London citizens continued to demand answers that would not come, even more than a century later. The ongoing case, which has spawned an industry of books, films, TV series and historical tours, has met with a number of hindrances, including lack of evidence, a gamut of misinformation and false testimony, and tight regulations by the Scotland Yard. Jack the Ripper has been the topic of news stories for more than 120 years, and will likely continue to be for decades to come. Will the mystery of who Jack the Ripper is ever be solved? What are your thoughts on the Ripper case? Thank you for watching, and we hope you found our video interesting. Like, comment and subscribe for more fascinating unsolved mysteries.